let's go talk about something different that's going to probably piss me off even more is what you just had to go through and
Yeah.
how they tried to take your kids away from you. And it's just I can't fucking believe this shit. So I'll let everybody else make um their own opinions of it, but go ahead and explain everything that went down.
Yeah. So I went through a situation with my spouse May 1st of this year where she made an accusation under duress. Um, and that accusation had to do with domestic violence. And the accusation she said that happened was that I hurt her. Um, Not only did I not hurt her, but everything that was said never happened. And so let's just take that, right? So if that's said, most police departments would do an investigation. I wasn't investigated at all. I was basically read the riot act. When I said I wanted to have my lawyer present because I wanted to actually work through this with a lawyer because I knew the first words out of the officer's mouth when he interviewed me was, "I know who you are," and I was like, "Okay, like is that like?" And then it wasn't like, "I know who you are, buddy." Like, "Hey, we're gonna work through this. We're gonna do an investigation." It was like, "I know who you are, and I don't care who you are. I'm gonna burn you to the ground." So on my initial questioning, he asked me what happened. I said, "Here's what happened, but I would like to have a lawyer present because I don't know how this works, but I need a lawyer." When I said that, he stood me up, put me in handcuffs, and booked me in jail on 30 years of charges. 30 years of charges, 4 felonies and 2 misdemeanors. And when I got into jail, because I didn't know what was going on, um, there was a realization via the people that were in the jail, the corrections officers who were like, "Dude, what's going on?" I'm like, "I have no idea. Like, I'm being booked, no clue." About a couple hours into it, I realized something's going on because they tell me, "We need to move you to solitary confinement." And I'm like, "What? Like, what's that? Is that good or bad? I don't know. I've never been to jail." They go to move me to solitary confinement and they stop me in the hallway. And 2 officers, a sergeant and his one of his guys, stops the guy who's moving me and says, "Where are you moving Mike?" And he's like, "I just got a call to move him to solitary." Move him to solitary. And they look at me and they go, "Mike, do you want to go solitary?" I'm like, "Guys, I'm in an orange jumpsuit. I don't know what's going on. Is that a good thing or bad thing?" Like, I seriously don't know. And I obviously know what solitary confinement is, but I'm thinking they want to move me there because people know me in the jail. Like a whole bunch of people knew me. Every corrections officer who saw me knew me. And I was like, "Oh, maybe they're trying to protect me." So I didn't know. I just went along with it. And I said, "Is that good or bad?" And they looked at me and said, "Dude, that's bad. You don't want to be in solitary." And I'm like, I I guess I don't want to go to solitary then. And they're like, "Turn him around and take him back to general population." So they turn me around and take me back. Come to find out, the officers basically said we need to move him to solitary because he's the highest risk and most violent of predators. He's like the worst of the worst. And solitary in Utah County Jail is a hole in the ground, and you basically get nothing. I mean, it's where they put people who are on suicide watch, people who are violent offenders. If you're a murderer, you're going into solitary confinement. So I find out that a couple of things happened. One, there's another Michael Glover that they were looking at, that they thought I was. So everybody in the system thought I was this Michael Glover who was a repeat offender who had this long criminal history. I get in processed and I'm like, I don't even know what's happening. Half the officers are like, "Oh yeah, you'll bail tomorrow, man. It's no big deal. It's like it's just part of the protocol." The other half of the officers are like, "We don't know what's going on, but they're not going to give you bail at all." And my lawyer actually met with me the first day and is like, "Hey man, I don't know what's going on, but they're not going to give you bail. So we need to wait." And so I waited in jail for a week. And what I found out was they didn't want to give me bail because they thought I was another dude named Michael Glover who had a criminal history. Two, they likely knew who I was at some point and then realized it was the wrong person, but wanted to potentially keep me in jail because of the severity of the crime. Except The victim, who in this case was my spouse, 48 hours later said, I have postpartum. I said things I didn't mean. And Derek, not only was she admitting that she wasn't a victim, she had no injury. She had no bruising, no injury. No, they went to the scene of where this incident took place. There was nothing. And so on the police report, they wrote, Mike broke her wrist, right? Which is a big deal. It was released all over social media day 2, which, I mean, if anybody publicly is listening to this, you would probably pay more attention if you realized, oh, wait a minute, the police leaked this across 5 different social media platforms while Mike was in jail, released the victim's information, completely information, first, middle, last name, date of birth, all of my kids' first, middle name, last name, dates of birth, my home address, and all the information they released on day 2. So maybe it's a concerted effort to, I don't know, bury me underneath the jail.
Sure seems that way.
It seems that way, right? So they go back and the district attorney, which I'll give the state attorney, which in this case was the person who looked at the case, looks at all the totality of the evidence. My lawyer isn't a big lawyer. He wasn't out of New York. He wasn't out of LA. My lawyer was a local Provo attorney that I hired via a cold call. He tells me, Mike, they're likely not going to get rid of this. They're probably going to plea it down because they never get rid of anything because they never want to look bad. They look at the entirety of the case. They completely dismiss everything. The cop wrote on the police report that the victim had a broken wrist. The victim, who was my spouse, had nothing. Her wrist wasn't broken. She had no bruising. She had no injury. And 48 hours after the fact said, I lied, right? Well, apparently in the country, and especially Utah, if you say you lied, then it's the person who's the batterer, typically the male, who somehow conspired. Hard to conspire when you're in jail for a week, right? So the criminal side is one component. Then they go in and they try to take our kid. They take Leland, our son, who's at the time 10 months old, because they say that we're both a threat to our child. They come in and it's not on the civil side for DCFS, Department of Child and Family Services. It's not criminal, but they do findings. You know what they found initially? They found that I was not abusive, but neglectful of my son. And the reason they said, because I didn't take my son out of the situation. If I thought it was so bad and there was a conflict between me and my spouse, which is the whole reason we got into the argument, then I would have took him out of that situation, except I was in jail. And my lawyer said, how would you find a finding of neglect and take their child when the finding is actually saying that we found him neglectful because he wouldn't take the son out of the home, but he was in jail. So he was incapable of doing that. So in about 55 days, it all gets dismissed. Everything gets turned around. And you could tell based on all the things that we saw, they started backpedaling because they started realizing, oh my God, we made huge, egregious mistakes. And for people who are listening to this, criminal cases are mostly never dismissed. They're pleaded down to, from a felony to misdemeanor. I went from 30 years of charges to about a year of misdemeanor charges to 0, to nothing. And whenever that happens, it's because likely there was misconduct or egregious mistakes made in the process of charging the potential suspect, in this case, the victim, me and my spouse in this case. So with that being said, look, a lot of mistakes were made. I don't blame Provo PD as a whole because I don't think it was a police department issue. I think it was bad apples, which I know specifically these officers' histories, to include one of the officers who was in charge who had his own domestic violence situation that was swept under the rug. And I know all the history of that, including them making statements saying they were going to burn us to the ground, essentially, which we have officers who are willing to testify against them which they likely don't know until now. And it's not over. For me, it's not over. They have qualified immunity, but they violated my civil rights. And so I'm fighting for that because I think that's important to do as somebody
Absolutely.
who seemingly I feel like a victim of this system, especially these officers. But it was disgusting, man. And look, I'm not a big deal. People might think I'm popular and I'm some big deal. But to see my stuff splashed all over social media, to see all the hate and all these things as my family's trying to pick up the pieces was hard to see. But at the end of the day, I think it's just part of, like, I don't know, man, adversity and like some of the challenges that we face. People go through it. I mean, you've been through your own challenges. We talked about, I've been through my own challenges, and you know, I'm just glad that the state attorney did the right thing. I'm glad that the case and the outcome has been what it's been, but it's been one hell of a ride, man.
What does your child think of it? Like, I know it's a little boy, right?
Yeah, my youngest son, and then they try to go after my twins, like my 5-year-olds,
Right.
and which is wild because they said, oh well, you know, my twins are from a previous relationship, so they tried to like go, oh well, he's been neglectful to these kids. It's like, no, never. And luckily, as my spouse and my ex came to step up, they're like, look, Mike is like the best father on the planet Earth, and he would never neglect nor abuse his kids. They actually took a statement that my spouse made about me spanking my children. I don't even spank my children. I rarely spank them. If my son smacks his sister, he's going to get spanked.
Yeah.
But that's the cap, right? I'm not just randomly abusing my children. They try to make the case that because I spanked my son, that was somehow abusive. And I'm like, okay, bring it. At the same time, by the way, Derek, they had a 12-year-old kid, 12-year-old young man in northern Utah who had been reported to DCFS for over a decade of abuse and neglect, who died of malnutrition. A 12-year-old boy died of malnutrition in an abusive home, and they're worried about me. They're worried about my spouse, my fat, healthy babies who are the happiest children on the planet. They went and interviewed my 5-year-olds. They went to their school, and a police officer was present and a DCFS agent was present, and they recorded the conversations. They went to my son. They said, Ben, what's the best part about mommy? They asked him, what's the best part about your mother? And my son said, Daddy. Like, dad's the best part of mommy. Like, that's how my kids are, right? They love their father. I have a good relationship with my kids. I have a good relationship with my ex and my spouse today. But for some reason, the system, they can't accept postpartum's actually a thing. They can't accept that things happen in the home that maybe it isn't an abusive circumstance where a man's beating the hell out of a woman. And then when they take the information and the evidence and you present that, they don't even believe it. DCFS, the head of DCFS said, I don't care what physical evidence you have, I'll always believe that Mike broke her wrist. And we're like, there's an x-ray here that shows there's no break to her wrist. And she's still saying, I don't care what that says, I'm going to believe it. It's like, wow, we have a broken system.
It's completely broken. I worry about, like, what did that do to your 5-year-olds? Like, because your youngest is not going to remember any of that, you know, but your 5-year-olds, I have a 5-year-old daughter now, and she would be like, if somebody came and took me away, she would be devastated, and it would probably traumatize her. So do you think that there's, like, I mean, for me, I would be suing for all of that.
Part of the suit is going to be part of that. Dude, my son, I didn't see my spouse or my 10-month-old son for 2 months.
That's
2 months.
insane.
And then when I could see my son, they allowed me visitation that was supervised 2 hours a week. So I had to go into a room with a supervisor, cameras, audio, video, and interact with my son for 2 hours a week. Then they try to go after me for my twins and couldn't see my kids, the twins, for a period of time. I was living in an Airbnb 30 miles from my home for 2 months. During a period of time where I had visitation of my twins, My son woke me up one morning and said to me, "Daddy, I had a dream. The police came in and killed you." And I said,
Oh,
"What? What are you talking about, son?" He goes, "I had a dream that the police came and they killed you." I'm like, "Son, like, is he?" I'm like, talking to my mom. Did he watch something? Like, what is going on? He was taking bits and pieces of information that he was hearing from all the things that were happening from the actual experience itself, and he thought his daddy was going to be killed by the police. And that's how traumatizing this was. I deliberately went to an Airbnb and hid my address because I was scared that they were going to raid my house, come into my home and kill me in my bed with my children. Because my twin 5-year-olds, they like to sleep in daddy's bed. And so,
yeah.
dude, I was scared, man. I was like, if they would go this far to lie, to make shit up, to bury me underneath the jail, how far were they willing to go? I mean, they went after Greg Lappin, who's my professor of black belt and jujitsu, who's a 20-year law enforcement officer. They gave him a charge of tampering with a witness for helping my spouse after I was put in jail. Literally going to the house and saying, "Hey, what can I help you with?" Like, your spouse is in jail. I get it. You said that this didn't happen, but he's in jail. What can I help you with? And they gave him a felony, a class 3 felony that is up to 5 years in prison for helping me and her. They hit him with that charge. When the district attorney saw that, they reviewed it and said, "There's literally an affidavit here, and there's no crime articulated via the report." Like, they charged him with a crime, like they charged me with a crime, with the zero evidence, and couldn't even articulate the crime. And the DA's like, "This is the dumbest shit I've ever seen." Completely dismissed this. But for 2 months, Greg is like trying to get guns, and he's on a waiting list because he can't get a gun because he's being pulled up as a felon. You know, he had to go to the police station and get booked and get biometrics. A 20-year law enforcement officer who took up for me, who took care of my family, and because they had angst, because they didn't like his face or they didn't like me, they decided to charge him with a frivolous crime. Like, that's the lawfare, and that's the way that these systems are abusing their rights and privileges. And honestly, man, like, I don't know how to change this in America when you have broken systems with broken people who are using whatever it is, whatever power they have to go after people they don't like. That's crazy.